Lesson 16. Returning to life, work, responsibilities, activity, and the meaning of everyday life. Returning to life after a schizophrenic episode does not begin with grand plans or with fully regaining your former strength. It begins with movement, with stepping back into everyday life that was interrupted for a time. Many people, after a period of stabilization, experience an inner suspension. On the one hand, symptoms are weaker, thinking is clearer, and life more structured. On the other hand, apathy appears, a lack of energy and fear of responsibility. This is a particularly difficult moment because it is easy to get stuck in a state of in-between, no longer in an acute crisis, but not yet in real life. Modern therapeutic guides and psychiatric rehabilitation programs are clear on this point. Long-term passivity worsens the prognosis. Lack of professional activity, responsibilities, and a clearly defined social role favors the consolidation of negative symptoms, lowers self-esteem, and leads to a gradual withdrawal from life. That is why one of the most important elements of recovery is returning to action as early and as consistently as possible, above all to work, but also to domestic duties and everyday activities. Work in schizophrenia is not just a way of earning money. It is a therapeutic tool that structures the day, strengthens your sense of agency, stabilizes your biological rhythm, and helps you leave the confinement of your own mind. Equally important are household duties and simple activities that prepare the ground for a return to professional work. From an economic point of view, activity protects against marginalization and dependence on others. From the point of view of mental health, against the breakdown of the inner structure of life. This lesson will not encourage heroics or overestimating your strength. It will, however, state clearly that recovery requires effort and a conscious stepping over your own limitations, gently, step by step, but consistently. Returning to life is not about waiting until every difficulty disappears. It is about beginning to be present again despite difficulties, at work, at home, and in your own life. Returning to life as an active process. After a schizophrenic episode, it is very easy to fall into the trap of passive waiting. The belief appears that you first have to get yourself together, regain full energy, motivation, and confidence, and only then return to action. In practice, however, something quite different usually happens. The longer passivity lasts, the harder it is to break it. The mind gets used to minimal effort, the body to immobility, and life gradually shrinks to the simplest survival activities. In therapeutic guides, this state is described as consolidation of negative symptoms, apathy, withdrawal, and loss of drive. Returning to life, therefore, does not consist in waiting until things get better, but in gradually entering into activity despite limitations. This may feel counterintuitive, but it is action that usually precedes an improvement in well-being, not the other way round. The nervous system regains balance through contact with reality, through the rhythm of the day, tasks to be completed, responsibility, and a sense of being needed. Even small amounts of activity send the signal that life is moving on and that the mind has something to relate to besides its own thoughts and fears. In practice, this means consciously making the effort even when you lack the desire. Fatigue, uncertainty, and inner resistance are natural at this stage of recovery and do not indicate failure. They are a sign that the body is learning to function anew after severe overload. The important thing is not to interpret these difficulties as proof that it's not time yet. For many people, the time never feels ideal, and yet, those who return to life most effectively are usually those who start to act early and consistently. Activity in this period does not have to be intense or spectacular. Its aim is not to prove anything to anyone, but to gradually rebuild your ability to function. Every time you leave the house, complete a task or take on a responsibility, it sends a signal to your mind that the world is once again a place where you can act, not just protect yourself. It is precisely this everyday, calm activity that creates the foundation for the next stages of recovery, including the return to work, responsibility, and independence. Work as one of the most important therapeutic tools. In schizophrenia, work has a significance that goes far beyond financial issues. In professional therapeutic guides and psychiatric rehabilitation programs, it is treated as one of the key stabilizing tools, on a par with pharmacotherapy and psychological therapy. Work structures the day, imposes a rhythm of sleep and wakefulness, reduces the amount of time spent on ruminations, and allows the mind to anchor itself in reality. It also provides something that is often very lacking after a psychotic episode, a sense of meaning and of being needed. Lack of work, especially when prolonged, contributes to deepening negative symptoms, apathy, withdrawal, and a sense of emptiness. From a clinical perspective, people who do not undertake any professional activity for a long time find it much more difficult to return to stable functioning. A mind deprived of tasks and responsibilities begins to circle around its own fears and limitations. Even if work seems too demanding at first, it is often the gradual stepping into responsibilities that leads to better concentration, improved mood, and greater psychological resilience. From an economic point of view, work has another role that cannot be overstated. It provides an element of independence and protects against complete dependence on the family or welfare institutions. For many people, knowing that they contribute to the household budget, even in a small way, is extremely important for their sense of self-worth. It also reduces relational tension and the feeling of being a burden, which is a frequent source of shame and suffering in people with schizophrenia. It is worth saying clearly, the perfect moment to start working almost never appears on its own. Readiness is built through action, not by waiting for full psychological comfort. Of course, work must be adjusted to your current abilities. Too much strain can be harmful, but complete resignation from activation usually proves to be more destructive than moderate effort. Work, even very simple and carried out in a limited scope, becomes a bridge between stabilization and a genuine return to life. How to return to work early, slowly, but consistently. A return to work in schizophrenia rarely goes in a straight line. It is usually accompanied by ambivalence. On the one hand, there is a need for normality and independence. On the other, fear of failure, exhaustion, and relapse of symptoms. Psychiatric rehabilitation manuals are consistent on this point. What matters is not the speed but the starting point and consistency. Putting off activation until everything is perfect usually ends in long-term passivity. It is much safer to start early, even when your readiness is only partial, and to move in small steps. At this stage, it helps to think of work broadly, as a form of structured activity rather than immediately as full-time employment. It can be work for a few hours a day, a few days a week, task-based work, seasonal work, auxiliary work, or work that offers clear boundaries and predictability. The important thing is that it has specific time frames, clearly defined duties and real responsibility. These are the elements that have a therapeutic effect. Forms of earning that are too chaotic, casual, and without structure often fail to provide this and do not create a sense of stability. It is natural that the first weeks of work are demanding. Fatigue after coming home, dips in energy, and even temporary mood worsening do not mean that work is harmful. They are often signs that the body is adjusting to a new level of activity. What is crucial here is careful self-observation and adjusting the pace, rather than giving up at the first difficulty. Consistency, even at a very moderate level of workload, builds psychological endurance far more effectively than an intense burst of effort followed by withdrawal. It is also worth remembering that work rarely brings satisfaction immediately. At the beginning it may simply be a duty, and that is fine. Over time, however, it is this regularity that starts to yield results, better concentration, more emotional stability, and a sense that the day has a meaningful structure. In the long term, calm, consistent commitment to professional activity becomes one of the most effective protective factors against relapse and marginalization. If, at a given moment, paid work is not yet possible, that does not mean the process has stopped. Working towards returning to work through household responsibilities, home-based piecework, volunteering, or regular activities prepares the ground for the next step. What counts is keeping the direction, activity instead of withdrawal. It is this direction, maintained consistently, that leads to a genuine return to life. Household duties as the foundation of regaining agency. Before professional work becomes stable or even possible at all, household duties play a fundamental role in recovery. In therapeutic manuals, they are not treated as help around the house, but as a real form of training for executive functions, planning, initiating action, maintaining concentration, and bringing tasks to completion. For a mind after a psychotic episode, these are key skills and at the same time often weakened ones. Regularly taking on specific responsibilities, cleaning, cooking, shopping, keeping things tidy, minor repairs, restores a sense of influence over reality. Each completed task sends a message to the mind: I can do this, I have agency, I am needed. This is particularly important at a time when self-esteem may be low and the illness undermines faith in your own abilities. From the point of view of household economics, these duties also have a practical dimension. They reduce the load on other family members and restore balance in relationships. The key, however, is that duties should be concrete, regular, and clearly defined. Vague or ad hoc tasks do not work. What works are tasks that come back every day or every week and to which you can get used. In this sense, household responsibilities are training for a return to work. They teach responsibility, punctuality, and consistency. Expectations that are too low reinforce passivity. Those that are too high lead to frustration. That is why it is important to find a level that requires effort but remains achievable. You should also not confuse limitations with lack of ability. Fatigue, reluctance, or temporary resistance are normal and should not lead to giving up. It is precisely regularity, even at a moderate pace, that rebuilds the inner structure of the day. Over time, many people notice that the more responsibility they take on at home, the easier it becomes to go out into the outside world and take on paid work. In practice, this means one thing: household duties are not a substitute stage or a waiting room. They are an integral part of therapy and often the first place where a real return to life begins. It is on this basis that readiness for further steps is built, for work, independence, and long-term stability. Hobbies and activity are support for work and stability. Hobbies and non-work activities play an important but clearly defined role in the recovery process. They are not an end in themselves or a substitute for work, but a form of support that helps maintain psychological and emotional stability during periods of increased effort. Professional therapeutic guides emphasize that well-chosen hobbies can regulate tension, improve concentration, and prevent overload, as long as they do not lead to isolation or avoidance of real responsibilities. The most helpful activities are simple, repetitive, and rooted in the real world. Manual work, crafts, gardening, DIY, drawing, music, or gentle physical movement have a stabilizing effect because they engage attention in a continuous and predictable way. A mind engaged in a concrete activity has less space for excessive analyzing, ruminating, and circling around its own limitations. From the nervous system's point of view, such activities act as a natural regulator of arousal. It is important, however, that a hobby does not become an excuse to withdraw from professional and family life. Sometimes people in remission begin to treat their interests as a safe alternative to work, which in the long term leads to stagnation. A hobby should support your ability to act, not replace it. It fulfills its role best when it is woven into the structure of the day, as a form of rest after work or duties, not as the main axis of life. From a therapeutic perspective, regularity is also important. Even short but consistent moments of activity provide a sense of continuity and predictability. In this way, a hobby can become a protective tool, helping to discharge tension, prevent overload, and support recovery without undermining the activation process. A well-chosen activity does not compete with work, it strengthens your ability to keep working. Ultimately, a hobby is there to serve one goal: maintaining balance. When it is used in this way, it becomes a valuable part of recovery. When it starts to replace responsibility and professional activity, it loses its therapeutic meaning. The ability to maintain this balance is one of the most important challenges at the stage of returning to life, and at the same time one of the most mature steps toward stability. Overcoming limitations, gently, but without withdrawing. Schizophrenia involves real limitations that cannot be ignored or overmotivated away. Fatigue, slowing, lowered concentration, anxiety, and mood swings are part of the illness and of its treatment. Acknowledging these limitations is important because it protects against excessive overload and feelings of failure. At the same time, therapeutic manuals clearly emphasize another, equally important truth: accepting limitations must not lead to giving up action. The line between caring for yourself and withdrawing can be thin. Long-term avoidance of effort, justified by the illness, very often consolidates negative symptoms and gradually narrows life down to a minimum. In clinical practice, it is clear that people who, despite difficulties, consistently engage in activity maintain remission better than those who remain passive for a long time. Overcoming limitations does not mean fighting your body or pushing yourself beyond your strength. It means a conscious decision not to allow the illness to dictate every aspect of your life. At this stage of recovery, your inner attitude becomes crucial. Instead of asking, "Do I have the strength today?" it is worth learning to ask, "What can I do despite being tired?" Sometimes it will be a few hours of work, sometimes completing a household duty, and at other times just leaving the house and keeping to the daily rhythm. Each of these steps matters because it maintains the direction towards activity, not towards isolation. It is this direction, sustained day by day, that determines your long-term functioning. It is also important to remember that initial resistance, lack of desire, and moments of doubt do not mean that treatment is failing. They are a natural part of the process in which the body is learning to function at a new level of load. Being gentle with yourself does not mean giving up effort, it means making an effort in reasonable doses and with an eye on the future. Recovery does not consist in returning to your old life tempo, but in building a new rhythm, one that allows you to act despite the illness, not alongside it. Summary: returning to life after schizophrenia is not about waiting until all difficulties disappear. It is about gradually and consistently entering into activity despite limitations, fatigue, and uncertainty. The most important tool in this process is work, understood broadly as professional activity, household duties, and real participation in everyday life. These are what structure the day, stabilize emotions, strengthen your sense of agency, and protect against withdrawal, which in the long term worsens the prognosis. Hobbies and non-work activities play an important supporting role, helping to regulate tension and restore strength, but they do not replace responsibility or work. Recovery requires gentleness towards your own limitations, but at the same time a firm stance against passivity. Every step taken towards action, even a small one, is an investment in stability and independence. Returning to life is a process that demands effort, yet it is precisely this effort that makes the illness stop being the center of everyday life and become just one of its elements.